right, welcome. My name is Diane Dehoney. I am the Community Service Librarian at Paul Sawyer. And on behalf of the Paul Sawyer Public Library, just want to welcome you tonight to this virtual program. We are so happy to be partnering once again with the Frankfort Audubon Society. They're a wonderful community organization, a wonderful community partner. And this has kind of turned into a mini series, I feel like, because Nora reached out to me and about doing a program, and we got such a wonderful response. Our community really loves birds and bird watching and bird identification and just all things birds, really. We found that out, and so we got really great feedback, and we want to give you all what you're interested in. So we've done, how many programs is this now, Nora?
This is the third. This is the third.
Mm-hmm. So if you keep enjoying it, please do let us know that you are, and we'll keep on bringing you this bird content. Or if there are other things, obviously, that you're interested in, please do feel free to contact me or let us know at the library, and we're happy to see what we can do about that, especially when it's with such wonderful community partners such as the Frankfort Audubon Society. So tonight, as I said, we're so glad to be partnering with them again, and with our wonderful presenter, Noor Salam, who is a member of the Frankfort Audubon Society. She's so knowledgeable, and if you haven't attended one of her programs yet, I know you're really going to enjoy this tonight. Sorry. I know you're really going to enjoy this tonight. You're going to learn a lot, and she just makes it fun for everyone, and gets everyone involved. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Noor Salam, from the Frankfort Audubon Society, as she presents Drumming and Mocking. What's that bird I'm hearing? Oh, Noor?
Thanks, Diane. I'm also joined by Lisa Gabbard, my amazing co-host, who's going to monitor the chat and help me go through the presentation. I'm so glad that I'm here and that I get to talk about birds. If you know me, you know I can never talk about birds enough. If you've attended our previous presentations, as Diane mentioned, welcome back. And I'd like to welcome all the new attendees, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. And in the first Bird ID webinar that we had, Common Backyard Birds, we talked about a wealth of backyard birds, but there's two groups of common backyard birds that I didn't cover in that last presentation, and I thought I might as well have a webinar for them, a webinar of their own for them. So, but before we get into that, let's do a little housekeeping. This is an interactive webinar, and we want to hear from you. There will be a few quizzes too, so get ready. So this is why I want to invite you to look at the bottom of your screen and make sure you click the chat button and use the chat feature here on the left to ask your questions and answer quizzes. And Lisa, my co-host, will relay them to me at the end, and she'll also tell me how you're doing on the quizzes. The birds we're going to talk about today are woodpeckers and mimic birds, and we're going to talk about the ones that occur in Kentucky. Also, just be mindful that we're going to try and learn the most characteristic sounds, but every bird can make all sorts of sounds. So we're just going to talk about the very characteristic ones, and you know, there's always a lot of variations, but there's these key things that you'll learn today that will help you identify birds. And as Diane just mentioned, this is going to be recorded for educational purposes. You can find this presentation on YouTube, as well as previous presentations, such as the common backyard bird and the introduction to hummingbird presentation. All right, and you probably have seen the slide before if you've been one of our backyard bird webinar attendees. We're gonna learn a little bit about bird anatomy. You don't need to remember all the terms I'm gonna say right now. I'm only gonna use a few of them, but hey, it might be useful for the future. So first here we have the crown, the top of the head. I'm definitely going to use that one. So remember this one. The bill as well is very important. And the throat. We have at the back of the head the nape. So that's kind of like the back of the neck. And the mantle is kind of the back area. And then we have the rump. And this is an important one that I'm going to talk about. It's the lower back area. We also have the tail, the belly, and the flanks, and the sides and the breasts. What's even more important than bird anatomy is bird sizes. It's really important that when you're trying to identify a bird, you kind of put it in one of those 4 categories. What are those categories? There's sparrow-sized birds, there's robin-sized birds, and then there's crow-sized birds, and lastly, geese-sized birds. And just for reference, a sparrow-sized bird, that's a bird that can fit in one palm of your hand, while a robin-sized bird, that's something that can fit into both palms of your hands. And why is this important to mention? This is because, while the mimic birds that we're going to talk about today are all about the same size, they're robin-sized, the woodpeckers, they vary in size. They're not all the same. All different species can be different sizes. So just keep this kind of category chart in mind when we start talking about woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are fascinating creatures. They have a really interesting flight pattern, and this is something that can help you identify them even if they're not sitting very still. So obviously they can be going up some trees, but when they move between trees, they have this very cool wave-like flight pattern. So they will flap their wings, go a little bit up, and then they'll stop flapping their wings, and they'll go a little bit downwards, and then so on until they get to their destination. Now, having said that, be careful. Not every bird that does this is a woodpecker. And this is where size is important again. Goldfinches, the very bright yellow birds, also fly like this. But guess what? They're the size of a sparrow. They're very small. There isn't any woodpecker that I know of in Kentucky that is just as small. They're all robin-sized or bigger. So remember, if you see a bird flying like this, if it's very small and yellowish or brownish, then that's probably a goldfinch. If it's bigger than that size, sparrow size or goldfinch size, and it's flying in kind of this wave-like pattern, then it's very likely that you're seeing a woodpecker flying. You can also recognize them, like I said, by their movement up a tree. They have very strong feet and very stiff tails that will help them stick to the tree. Now, what's that sound? This is obviously a woodpecker drumming on a tree. And I'm sure you know that woodpeckers go up the trees to find food. They also drum, like they peck at the trees to find food. They peck at the trees to make their nests. You probably already know that. You've seen a woodpecker nest. It's a little hole in the tree. But I bet you didn't know that this sound that I just played is used for communication. They can talk to each other by drumming from a distance. Now, if you want to be absolutely mind blown, let's talk about a woodpecker's tongue. Have you seen those things? They're very long. And when they're not using them to eat, they get stored in the back of their heads. And it's not just any regular storage like we have. The tongue doesn't just go in the jaws, it goes into the back of the skull and then all the way back to the top of the skull, which is kind of crazy. They also, when they're pecking the trees, they can withstand about 1,000 times the force of gravity. So talk about some extreme shock absorption. Woodpeckers eat insects, nuts, berries, seeds, and suet. Now, before we get to the good part, we have to talk a little bit about the sad part. There are 2 woodpeckers in this presentation that you can't identify in Kentucky. Why? because they're not there anymore. They're extinct. This fella right here is the ivory-billed woodpecker. The ivory-billed woodpecker is extinct in the wild. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world anymore. It used to live in the southeastern US and Cuba, and it was the third largest woodpecker in the world. And unfortunately, destruction of its forest habitat caused a severe decline in their numbers in the 1800s, and only a very, very small number survived into the 20th century. They have been sighted, they have been last seen in the US in the early 2000s. And this is a very hotly debated topic. And I invite you to look more into the ivory-billed woodpecker. We thankfully have a picture of what this bird was like. We also have a recording of what it sounded like. And it actually sounds like just like a trumpet. Let's listen to that. So sadly, that is a sound that I will never get to hear. Another bird that is not extinct in the whole wide world, that's the bird that's extinct only in Kentucky, is the red-cockaded woodpecker. To some of you who are already familiar a little bit with woodpeckers, this one might look like the hairy woodpecker or downy woodpecker, and we're going to talk about these two later. This is, however, a different species, and it's called the red-cockaded woodpecker because it has a red cockade. Well, where is it? You can't see it in this picture. It's actually very difficult to see, and it's very an unreliable identification feature, but you can definitely see it in this picture. A cockade is a part of a hat. It's like an ornament on a hat, and so you can see it here in the top of its head. And let's listen to what this bird sounds like. So, you can still go and see or hear this bird outside of Kentucky. This is where its current range is. You can find it in the Carolinas or all of the Gulf Coast states. What happened in Kentucky? Well, this bird really likes living in mature pine forests, and there we used to have a really good habitat for them. Unfortunately, there was a disease, and it was caused by the southern pine beetle. That disease destroyed thousands of acres of habitat for this bird in Kentucky. And the number of individuals was so small that it could not persist as an actual population. And federal agencies transported the last remaining population of red-cockaded woodpecker in Kentucky to South Carolina and Arkansas in 2001. So 2001 was the last time we had this bird in Kentucky. Now, why is it so important to talk about these two birds? Because when woodpeckers peck trees and make holes and cavities, not only are they trying to ensure their own species survival, they're also helping other species survive. Why? Actually, owls, ducks, bats, and some other mammals will use old woodpecker holes. This makes the woodpecker kind of like an architect of the woods. And what do you call a species that directly helps other species survive in its surroundings? That's something called a keystone species. So as you can see in this picture, a keystone is a very important part of this arch. If you remove the keystone, that whole arch might fall apart. So it's very important to remember that when we think about conservation of species, is that some species, if they disappear, that might impact not just that one species, but a whole bunch of other species. Currently, there are 7 species in Kentucky, 7 species of woodpeckers, excuse me, in Kentucky, and 6 of them are year-round residents. 1 of them is migratory. So what that means is that in fall and winter, you can actually get really lucky and see all 7 of them in one day. I haven't had that happen to me, but one day I'm gonna get that lucky. Let's dive in. Let's start with the red-headed woodpecker. This is one of the easiest woodpeckers to identify. They have a completely red head. They also, when they're flying, they have a very distinct white rectangle on their lower backs. So the white rectangle extends from their tails to both of their wings as well. They're the only North American woodpecker that can store food and cover it with tree bark to retrieve it later. Let's listen to what they sound like. All right, we're gonna come back to this after talking about the red-bellied woodpecker. Well, it's called a red-bellied woodpecker, but you might be wondering, where is that red belly? It's really hard to see, and you just got to get the right light and just all the right conditions. But it is there. This is a really good photo of a red-bellied woodpecker. But in all honesty, like I said, it's really difficult to see. And if you really want to be confident in your identification, don't look for that red belly. Look at the head. So we just saw the red-headed woodpecker, which has a completely red head. This one is the red-necked woodpecker. So look at the neck. It's not, and it's only the back of the head that has the reds all the way into the bill. Let's listen to what the red-bellied woodpecker sounds like. So now that you heard both of them, let's go back to the red-headed woodpecker and notice this time how the red-headed woodpecker has kind of a sore throat compared to the red-bellied woodpecker. To compare, let's hear the red-bellied woodpecker, which does not have a sore throat. Awesome. Well, now that you're experts in differentiating red-bellied and red-headed woodpeckers, let's actually look at a little bit more about the red-bellied woodpecker. You can actually tell if it's a male or female. Just look at the top of the head. The red neck on the male extends all the way to the front and right above the bill. In the female, only the back of the neck is red, or the nape, and it kind of looks like she's a little bit bald in the front and does not have the reds. Next, we have the pileated woodpecker. Wow, this bird is the largest woodpecker in Kentucky. It's the size of a crow. The oldest known individual is 12 years old. Now let's listen to what they sound like. The pileated woodpecker has a very loud series of these calls, and they can last several seconds, and they echo throughout the woods if you ever hear them. Now, we're going to compare that with the northern flicker. The northern flicker has a similar call, and we're going to talk about the differences and similarities. But before we do that, let's look at the differences between the male and the female pileated woodpeckers. This time, you have to look at the cheeks. So male pileated woodpeckers have a red line on their cheeks, and then on the right, you can look at the female and see that she has a black line on the cheeks. Here goes the northern flicker. This is a fascinating bird, one of my favorite woodpeckers, and it's a ground feeder, as opposed to many other woodpeckers that forage on the bark of the trees. This bird is yellow shafted, so look at the underside of the wings and see how bright yellow they are. You might notice it fly away and just see flashes of yellow. In the eastern United States, they're all yellow shafted. In the western United States, they are red shafted.
Another really
yeah, go ahead.
My question is, like, what do woodpeckers use as a nest?
That's a really good question. They will peck a hole in a tree and create a whole like cavity in there, and they might bring some like twigs or like nesting materials, and they'll just lay their eggs inside the hole, and then also like the chicks will grow up inside that hole, and then when they're ready to fly away, they'll have to go outside and jump outside of the hole. Does that answer your question?
Huh.
Yeah. Awesome.
Do they? Would they use a birdhouse by any chance?
I'm not sure actually. I can't think of a. It's possible, and I'll have to get back to you. It's possible.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. So and northern flickers, I don't think I've seen a northern flicker use a box, but I don't. Yeah, we'll get back to that. So for those yellow shafted woodpeckers, the northern flickers, another really good way to ID them is you'll probably see a white rump. It's very distinct, and the rump, as I mentioned earlier, is the lower back area. They have just a large white patch on their lower backs. Let's listen to what they sound like, and notice how, as opposed to the pileated, they sound very similar, but they're very steady in the rhythm of their calls, and they don't vary very much like the pileated. Here we go. So this was the northern flicker. Let's hear the pileated again, and notice how it varies a lot in volume and rhythm, and the flicker was a lot more steady in its sounds. Well, it's very difficult to tell them apart. I struggle with that, but just try to pay attention to what type of calls you're listening to, and maybe try to record them and submit them to the new Merlin Bird Sound ID app, and that might very much help you, especially with these difficult birds that sound very much alike: the pileated woodpecker and the northern flicker. Northern flickers are also different when it comes to males and females. This time, it's all about that mustache. Check out that mustache on the male here on the left, and look at the female on the right. She does not have a mustache. So that's just the one way to tell them apart. Next, we have the yellow-bellied sapsucker. They have a red throat and a red crown. They make these very shallow holes on trees to feed on the sap. And they're the only woodpecker in eastern North America that's completely migratory. Like I said before, every other woodpecker we're going to talk about, you can see it any time of the year. This one, you can only see in the winter or fall. Let's listen to what these guys sound like. So I think you agree that was the cutest thing ever. I don't hear them much. They're not, I haven't been lucky in hearing them. They're rather quiet usually, but I hope you're more lucky than I am in hearing them. They're also, by the way, if you haven't noticed, this bird, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, is the bird that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology uses as their logo. Now let's talk about the downy and the hairy woodpecker. What's the secret trick to identify them? We're gonna tell you all of our secrets today. They're nearly identical in the patterns. I mean, look at them, but they're very different in size. So how do you ID them? You just wait for them to sit next to each other, like in this very awesome photo, right? Well, maybe some of you will get lucky like that, but in the meantime, I'm gonna give you 2 tricks to tell them apart. And before we get to that, let me point out that both of these fellas in the picture are males. The females look identical for both species, except they don't have that little red dot on the back of their heads. All right, so in these 2 photos, obviously, it would be very difficult to figure out which one is the downy and which one's the hairy. The photos are zoomed in differently. They're sitting on what seems like different sizes of tree branches. So really, there's really not much to go by in terms of scale. Which one is the bigger one? Well, here's a secret. Don't compare them to things around them. Compare them to themselves. There's a really good video made by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology just specifically about this topic. I'm going to talk about this technique. So look at the bill on the downy here on the left. I highlighted it with a little red line. So that's about the size of the bill that I drew with a red line. Compare the size of the bill with the head. So that's what it means when I say compare the bird with itself. I just put that same line, but on the head. And what do you see? It barely goes past the eye if we start from the beginning of the bill backwards. Barely goes past the eye. So it's not even as big as the head. It's almost about half the size of the head or a little bit less. Now let's look at the hairy woodpecker on the right. So this is about what the size of its bill is with the red line. Let's put that red line right on top of the head. What do we find? Well, it's almost as big as the head. So this is a really important thing when you're out there looking at hairy or downy woodpeckers. Just look at the size of the bill and try to see what it looks like in comparison to the head. I know this is difficult to do because they're definitely not sitting still. Woodpeckers move very quickly, but this is one of the best ways to identify them. There are more subtle ways. They're even more difficult to see, like little dots on the outer feather tails, but it's not very reliable, especially if you're just starting out with identifying woodpeckers. So definitely look at the size of the bill compared to the head. The other really good way to identify them, if you have really good ears, is by sound. Of course, they're going to sound different, but there's a very good trick to remember which one is the downy. Let's listen to the downy first. So notice how it starts with this whinny and then goes down in pitch. I'm gonna play it one more time. Notice how it goes down in pitch. And that's it. Downy is for down. It goes down in pitch. The hairy sounds very similar, except that it does not go down in pitch. Let's listen to the hairy woodpecker. So notice how it doesn't go down in pitch. That's how you should remember it. Downy is for down, downwards in pitch, and then hairy is hairy woodpecker. It just doesn't go down in pitch. So now that you're experts on identifying woodpeckers, we're going to go to some quizzes. I'm going to ask you to identify what's this bird, and I want you to write it down in the chat and just do your best. And Lisa is going to tell me how you did. I'm going to give you a little bit of time, obviously, if you like a minute. I should probably have some waiting music going on right now.
Next time we'll use the Jeopardy theme song.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was thinking of. So how are we doing so far?
People are pretty quiet. I've had one person.
Oh,
There we go.
trying their luck.
Mm-hmm. Got a bunch of folks chiming in.
Awesome.
Redheaded.
Awesome. Well, they definitely got that right. That was the red-headed woodpecker. Let's do an audio quiz. I want you to try and guess which bird this one is. This is a very common bird in Kentucky. I'm going to play it one more time. How are we doing, Lisa?
Well, one person sent me a direct message with the right answer, but I haven't seen anybody else put the answer in. Oh, there's somebody. Yes, the red-bellied. And I have no numbers on this, and maybe someone else on the Zoom can pipe up, but I feel like it's got to be the most common woodpecker. I see them and hear them everywhere.
They're very, very common. They also visit feeders very, very often. And yes, indeed, this is the red-bellied woodpecker. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of a challenge to see if you learned the tricks that I taught you. I want you to tell me which bird this is. So remember, compare the bird to itself and see what you get.
Already got a couple plants, folks, who have that one figured out.
Nice. I'm very proud.
You should be.
So if you're still thinking about it, look at that bill and compare the bill to the size of the head. It's very, very small. So that is a downy woodpecker. I'm so glad you guys participated. There's going to be one last quiz at the end for the mimic birds. What are mimic birds? Those are birds in the Mimidae family, and the Mimidae family includes mockingbirds, thrashers, and catbirds. They are fascinating birds because they their songs are just all about imitating other birds. And they learn so many different bird songs throughout their whole lifetime. They also can imitate sirens, car alarms, you name it, all the sounds around them. The first one is the northern mockingbird, of course. The mockingbird does 3 or more repetitions of the same phrase in its song. And we're going to listen to that. So did you notice how every part is repeated like at least 3 times? Keep that in mind when we're going to talk about the brown thrasher. Other ways to identify the mockingbird are its very distinct white wing patches when it flies or when it's displaying its wings on the ground. These mockingbirds are lifelong learners. A male may learn 200 songs throughout his life. That's crazy. They can also serenade you at night. So lucky you if you get that. Moving on, the brown thrasher, on the other hand, only repeats things 2 times. Let's listen to that and notice how much shorter those repetitions are compared to the mockingbird. So 2 times. Always look for these patterns and try to count the number of repetitions when you hear a bird like that. Brown thrashers, it should be noted that brown thrashers are ground feeders. You most often will hear some rustling in the leaf litter, and that is just sometimes brown thrashers foraging, trying to find food under the leaves. Great catbirds are also mimic birds. They have a black crown and a brown undertail. They don't really repeat anything, and there's not really a structure to their song. It's just things, things thrown out back to back. There's no repetitions really. They also meow, as their name says. So let's listen to first just like what their regular sounds like, and then I'm gonna let you hear their meows. So the whole thing sounds quite a bit random, but did you notice the little meows in between? Well, here's more meows for you. So no, this is not a kitten. This is a gray catbird just meowing in the trees. I hope you really get to see this bird. They're all the mimic birds are super interesting in terms of behavior. Let's do a little quiz. And of course, it's going to be a sound quiz because those mimic birds are quite fascinating with their songs. Let's see if you can identify this one. And try and count the number of repetitions. How do we do, Lisa?
4 people. Scott pretty quickly identified this as a brown thrasher, and then 3 other folks chimed in as well. So I think your clue about counting really helped folks with that one.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear. Well, they were right. Brown thrasher was the bird. They repeat things 2 times, as opposed to the mockingbird. The mockingbird would be at least 3 repetitions. We're almost at the end of the presentation, but I have a little bonus for you. There are other birds that can mock you, or AKA mimic other birds and sounds around them. These birds aren't really part of that same family, the Mimidae family, but they can be little tricksters regardless. What are these birds? It's a blue jay, starling, and yellow-breasted chat. So what's that? It's a hawk, or is it a blue jay? It could be very much a blue jay. Blue jays can imitate hawks, and so can European starlings. They're very good at it, and I've been tricked by them before. They do this to intimidate intruders on their territory, and maybe for other reasons, maybe just for fun. We don't know. We also have the yellow-breasted chat. These birds are very interesting. They honestly make me laugh because they make all sorts of sounds. Some sounds sound like a chuckle or a laugh. They also can meow, but it's very different from the gray catbird. You will know that it's not a gray catbird. Let's listen to them. That was a meow at the end. That pretty much concludes it for today. I want to thank our co-host, the Paul Sawyer Public Library, for helping us organize this event. I would like to invite you to check out and research these birds on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website, allaboutbirds.org, or the audubon.org website at the National Audubon Society. And please follow us on Facebook for more events, and feel free to join our free newsletter. You can also join us as a member and join our bird walks as well. We also have some more resources for you. There's a birding quiz that you can take here below to test your what you learned from today. There's a really cool podcast that I've been listening to called The Science of Birds, and it's been very inspiring and meaningful. If you really are interested in learning more about Sound ID, check out the Merlin Bird Sound ID app. It will let you start the Sound ID, and it will let you know in real time what you're listening to, which I thought was pretty awesome. And this was just released last month or 2 months ago. And with that, I really want to hear what questions you all have about woodpeckers, mimic birds, or just really anything that you're curious about in general. So feel free to ask them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and see if we can get your questions.
I'm sorry I interrupted you. I was going to say I copied down a couple questions from the chat so that we could discuss them. I think Elizabeth asked, did the woodpecker's tongue help cushion their head while they were drumming? And I said, I knew that they did, but I don't really know much detail. And so I don't know if you have any other information or details on that particular aspect.
It does. I think it does help. So it goes into a bone called the hyoid bone. And that bone in itself is just like so well built. And I think it's part of their cushioning process, but there's so much more to it. But it's just mostly for storing the tongue because it's so long. It can't just fit right in their mouth.
Great. Thank you for that. Someone asked, again, I think it might have been Elizabeth, who's full of some really cool questions. Why does it seem like all the woodpeckers, sorry to say hummingbirds, I'm living in the past. Why do most of the woodpeckers seem to be black and white and red, but the flicker is so different looking? And, you know, I've never really thought about that. And I don't know if anyone involved has any suggestions or ideas on that.
That is a really awesome question, and it has to do with obviously the evolution of those birds. And I don't think I can really comment on this because you would think that because they spend so much time on tree bark, that they would have some colors like the tree bark. So for example, owls, a lot of owls camouflage so well because they just sit on the tree bark, and during the day they have to be hidden. Woodpeckers don't have those colors, so I think really that's such an interesting question. I wonder if there's probably research about this type of question. You asked a research question there, and not sure why they're black, white, and red. And flicker is definitely a ground feeder compared to the others, so I definitely think the flicker blends in really well with the ground. But you know, these other black and white and red colors, that's one I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, Gary piped up in the chat with a suggestion about that he was aware of. And then there are two other questions too. So folks really are chiming in, and that's
good discussion. Yeah,
I know, it's great. So Gary says the black and white pattern found in the backs of many woodpeckers helps to conceal them from predators. This is known as disruptive coloration. So I had a feeling someone might know. That's really interesting.
This is excellent. Actually, I just watched a documentary about this. This is similar to the way in which zebras will camouflage. They also have this type of disruptive coloration that just confuses predators when they look at them, because there's so many patterns going on, and it definitely confuses them and throws them off. So this is in this what Gary I think is trying to say. In a similar way, these different colors, box of colors, helped confuse predators when they're looking at them. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, that's really neat. And
was
on
awesome.
the same topic of woodpeckers, I hope I don't mispronounce this name, Natalia, I think it's a beautiful name, asks if their foraging patterns of woodpeckers as they move around a tree while feeding be another way to identify them, or she says, is it just more useful to distinguish them from other species that forage on the surface of the tree?
So I don't know that there's a way to distinguish different tree foraging woodpeckers or creeping woodpeckers. I would definitely rely on just what their color patterns are and their sounds. I mean, even northern flickers, I say they're ground feeders, they can be seen sometimes foraging on the trees. This is just, they more commonly forage on the ground, but it doesn't mean it's exclusive. So I definitely wouldn't rely on their movements in that way, or I'm not, so much of an expert to do that. Those would be very difficult to do just based on their movements. They all move very fast and very randomly on a tree. It would be very hard to tell. But this is also a very interesting question. Is the difference in movements.
There's a couple more I'd like hopefully to get to. Doug is referencing the mimic birds, and he makes a good point. If a mockingbird can mock a brown thrasher, how would you know who's who?
That would be the ultimate trickery for the mockingbird. That has never happened to me, as far as I know. They just love to repeat things 3 or more times. That would be quite fascinating if a mockingbird mimicked a brown thrasher. Yeah, you couldn't tell. You would have to try and find them. And I have to say, right now it's really important to learn bird by sound, because it's summer. There's so many leaves everywhere. Everything is really difficult to see. So if a mockingbird did that right now and I couldn't really find it, I wouldn't know, but you just gotta try and find it and see it and see who's trying to trick you.
Well, Joyce did remind us that a mockingbird would still repeat 3 or more times,
Yes.
so you might be able to
Mhm.
count. But
Yeah.
and then Rachel has a question that is not directly related to either of the species we've been speaking about tonight, but I think this is a good place to bring it up because we've got a group of people who clearly are interested in birds. She was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about the nighthawks this year. She says she's found 2 or 3 territories in downtown Frankfort, but there seemed to be fewer than there were last summer. So I didn't know if anybody else was interested in or knew anything about the nighthawk population in Franklin
Mhm.
County.
No, I don't know any differences between the years. I'll let Gary chime in or Rob, but I have seen them, over just the Kroger parking lot. They make this very distinct sound, and while they're hunting for insects, I don't know that they've declined. And while we're waiting for maybe people to chime in on that, let me add about the mockingbird that something I didn't mention. They sometimes have seasonal songs. So during the winter, they'll imitate a lot of the winter birds that are around them. And then in the spring and summer, they might pick up some more songs of the migratory birds that are settling in the area. So another really cool fact about the mimic birds.
You're smart.
Different tastes of songs. I don't know the answer about the nighthawks. This is definitely a cool topic to cover in another presentation, just nighthawks and other night birds.
Go ahead.
I have 2 questions. First question is, what is the red-headed woodpecker's diet?
Really, that's a really good question. The red-headed woodpecker will feed on, seeds. They will visit feeders, and as with other woodpeckers, they will eat suet as well.
Okay. My second question is, why do the northern mockingbirds sing at night?
Yeah, that's awesome. So they do this for many reasons. During the breeding season, so when they're trying to attract a mate, they'll sing a lot because they need to find that mate, and so that they can create a nest and have chicks with them. So they'll sing nonstop, and they'll sing at night. I mean, they're just relentless. They never get tired. But even after they find a mate, they will still do that to defend their territory. And mockingbirds are not the only bird that will just sing at night. There are other birds that can do that, but they're just one of the loudest. And they'll do this, as I said, for breeding, for defending their territory, making sure it's clear whose territory that is day and night.
Neat.
Really good question. And let me add on the red-headed woodpecker that they also eat some insects and fruit.
Yes.
So Doug asked about the disease that
Mhm.
is so mysterious, I guess, and
The bird
Gary
disease?
yes, I apologize, I wasn't clear. The one that has asked, where we've asked folks to take down feed,
Yeah,
clean them. Gary posted a link to our Fish and Wildlife
thank you.
page, so thanks for that, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, they're keeping us updated well.
I was just looking at that for the presentation. There aren't any new updates, but yeah, this is a really good question to bring up. Currently, there are 6 counties where you should not put up feeders. Those are Bullitt, Campbell, Madison, Boone, Jefferson, and Kenton counties. The diseases have been very much reported and confirmed there. This doesn't mean that other counties are completely safe. If you want to really go on the safe side, don't put up bird feeders. The birds will be fine. There are plenty of food sources for them right now. You're not hurting the birds by not putting food out for them. So yeah, definitely in those counties, please try to not put up your bird feeders. I know you miss the birds, we all do, but just try to be on the safe side so you can safely see them later when this is all over. Thank you, Gary, for that link.
That's all the questions in the chat right now, Nora. I think
Those were awesome questions, by the way.
I know. Great interactions with people tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Well, awesome. Well, I would like to thank everyone for coming, and I hope to see you in future webinars.
Thank you, Diane.
This is the Jeopardy.
Somebody came through for us.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to everyone, especially to, let me see here. Do I still have you on? Let's see. Let me stop the share really fast here. Okay, now we can see everybody. I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It was so wonderful to see some of you, see everyone, even if it was virtually. We appreciate you supporting the library and our virtual programming. And hopefully we'll all be back together again soon. Nora and I were just talking about that before the program, that we've actually never met in person. Only met virtually, so it'll be nice to see everyone. We thank you for coming out tonight. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned a lot. I know I did. And please do let your friends and family know if they're also interested in the topic tonight, that we will be posting this video to the Paul Sawyer Public Library YouTube page. Check back next week and we should have that up. And you can also see the other presentations that we did before this one. Also, if you are enjoying this topic, enjoying this type of programming, please let us know. And we'd love to continue on bringing you more of this content. Thank you again to Nora for another wonderful presentation. And thank you to the Frankfort Audubon Society for being such a wonderful partner. And we hope to see you all very soon at the library. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.